Welcome to the Crypto Teacher, and guys, I'm going to come at you with a video to make you think first. Now, basically, this one is about Bill Gates, the mole, and all of the corporations. Now, we know all these big corporations have some type of connection. But when you look at Microsoft, you see Bill Gates, the nerd. But what you don't see is the history of Bill Gates. The father who was connected to, of course, eugenics, Planned Parenthood, which they switched over to with Margaret Sanger. Basically, you have the Rockefellers, George Soros, is all connected into one in order to bring about the New World Order. But this story here that I'm going to bring to you, it really makes you sad, because the fact is that you understand that you actually, the more you study, the deeper you have to go. You have to go behind the curtain. But enjoy the story.
Impact on the world. So what software was going to run on it? This was the battle for one operating system that would rule them all. The stakes are high. Every decision here impacts the rest of all history. And herein lies one of the saddest stories in computing history. While building their PC in 1980, IBM approached Microsoft to build the operating system. Before saying a word about the project, IBM asked Bill Gates, who was initially mistaken for the office intern, to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Bill Gates had to keep IBM's plan a secret, and he couldn't tell a single soul. When IBM told Gates what they were doing, he remarked that Microsoft didn't have an operating system. The 25-year-old programmer would point IBM in the direction of Gary Kildall. Gary was a meek and mild-mannered man, but despite being unassuming, he had already paved the way for operating systems and personal computers. In 1971, Kildall had made a programming language for Intel's first CPU, the 4004. But he quickly realized that there had to be a way to control how the chip interacted with the rest of the computer system. In 1972, he solved this problem with CPM, which stands for Control Program for Microcomputers. This was the very first PC operating system. Before CPM, each computer had to have tailor-made software. Imagine it like this. It would be like having different types of fuel for every single car model in existence. With an operating system like CPM, a programmer only needed to write software just once, and CPM would take care of the rest. It was a way to run the very same software on different computers.
It just was a very natural thing to write, and it turns out other people had a need for an operating system like that. And so it was a very natural thing. I wrote it for my own use.
Despite this, Gary didn't really have much interest in business matters and was just doing this as a hobby. But his wife, Dorothy, convinced him to start a business and start licensing his creation. The result was a company called Digital Research. By 1979, Digital Research became the industry standard for operating systems. In essence, they were the Microsoft of the late 1970s, and Gary was equivalent to Bill Gates. So IBM had just approached Bill Gates and asked him if he could make an operating system for their new PC, and Bill Gates pointed them in the direction of Gary. So, keen to waste no time, IBM takes Bill's advice and pays a visit to Gary in Seattle. Bill calls Gary on the phone to give him some warning that someone is coming to visit. Because of the non-disclosure agreement, Gates couldn't reveal exactly who was coming to visit. Bill exclaimed, quote, "Treat them right, they're important guys," end quote. Unfortunately, Gary was a somewhat chilled out guy and didn't really get the full urgency of what Bill was warning. Perhaps he thought it was just another small company and not the largest tech company on the planet. Because of this, Gary isn't home when IBM visits. He's out flying one of his private planes on business. IBM ends up talking to Gary's wife, Dorothy, who is now head of operations and digital research. The lawyers of IBM began pushing her to sign a non-disclosure agreement, essentially to say that they were never there. Dorothy wasn't impressed by this and refused to sign the document. The IBM team had a short temper. After going nowhere with negotiations, they became frustrated and decided to leave Gary's house. A few days later, IBM would approach Bill Gates a second time. Gates, being deterministic and opportunistic in nature, was never going to give Gary a second chance. He saw that IBM had the potential to change the PC market into something entirely different, a new cleaned-up business image instead of the geeky enthusiast image it had. So here comes the clincher. Bill Gates decided to do something pretty sneaky. He told IBM that Microsoft could in fact make an operating system even though they didn't have one. What Microsoft decided to do was just buy an operating system from a small company down the road for $75,000. This operating system was called the Quick and Dirty Operating System, or QDOS for short. If you think that that's a bit of a weird name, there's a reason for it. The code used for this software was essentially a rip-off of CP/M, the operating system that Gary had made. So with this rip-off of CP/M, Microsoft now had their hands on a functioning operating system. QDOS would become Microsoft DOS, or MS-DOS for short, and would be packaged with every IBM PC. So if you've ever used MS-DOS, it could be said that you were using the Microsoft Dirty Operating System. However, this name would be officially changed to Microsoft Disk Operating System. And of course, MS-DOS would eventually become Microsoft Windows. The first IBM PC was released in August of 1981. It was predicted to make 250,000 sales, but it was a smash hit, selling 2 million units in a couple of years. IBM had now overtaken Apple as the world's largest PC manufacturer. With this event, it was now truly okay for the white-collar class to get into PCs. It was no longer for hobbyist freaks and enthusiasts. Around this time, Gary became the co-host of the show Computer Chronicles, a TV program that followed in detail the progress of personal computers at the time.
Gary, we're going to be talking about things like transportables and lap portables, but I want to show you this portable over here. This looks like a pretty small computer, but in fact this is just the keyboard. I can program my things into my computer, and in fact this is the computer, and of course it is now a wrist portable. Now, I don't know whether this does anything very useful or not. In fact, that's my question about this whole subject with portables. Is this another case of technology in search of a purpose?
I don't think so, Stuart. It's just a new dimension in technology. We have had faster processors, more memory, and so forth in the past. Now what we're looking for is trying to get all that speed and power into a smaller package.
So everything was falling into place for Bill Gates. He was getting set to be the richest man in the world. The dirty operating system was one half of the equation, but some smart business sense would complete it. Because the IBM PC was made from off-the-shelf parts, other manufacturers such as Compaq and HP began making their own PC clones with the very same parts. The deal for Microsoft was that MS-DOS would be licensed to IBM by Microsoft for a one-time fee of $50,000. But there was a catch. Microsoft never mentioned to IBM that their deal was non-exclusive. Soon, Microsoft was selling MS-DOS to all of IBM's competitors, taking a licensing fee from every computer sold. This licensing deal has been called the greatest deal in history. It made Bill Gates a billionaire. Gary's failure to not be there at the right time is conversely called one of the biggest business failures in history. Once the sales of the IBM PC took off, Gary had realized what he had lost. For a rare moment, he would shed off his kind nature and threaten to sue IBM. In a settlement, IBM agreed to offer CP/M alongside MS-DOS with every PC sold. Gary Kildall was pleased. People could now choose for themselves which software they liked best. Justice had finally been served. There was only just one problem though. When both software packages were released, MS-DOS sold for $40 and CP/M $240. This was a complete disaster for almost identical pieces of software. For this reason, Gary's CP/M software would fade into obscurity by the late 1980s. Gary had lost to a clone of his own creation.
Gary Kildall was perhaps best known as the man who chose to go flying on the day IBM came calling. It was the event which dogged him his entire life, and it has become a legend in personal computer history. But his friends and co-workers alike agree that the story is mostly myth, and that the facts are very different.
Gary and I were scheduled to go that morning up to meet with Bill Godbout, who was one of the early people in the microcomputer industry building an S100 system, and we were delivering him CP/M documentation. So Gary and I, as the story goes, were in fact flying. We flew up to the Bay Area, up to the Oakland airport, delivered the software to Bill, and flew back down and joined the IBM meeting. We were there for the meeting later in the afternoon. By that point in time, things had already gone a little bit wrong. IBM had come into the meeting. They had a what I would call a unidirectional non-disclosure agreement. The idea was that Digital Research was to agree that they had never met IBM and the meeting hadn't occurred, and yet everything that Digital Research disclosed to IBM was intended to be public domain. That was the way the agreement was structured.
IBM also wanted to buy CP/M outright for a flat fee and rename it PC-DOS. terms that were unacceptable to DRI. IBM then approached Microsoft and tried to license its clone of CP/M called QDOS. When IBM discovered that it might be facing a copyright lawsuit, they returned to DRI and struck a deal. DRI agreed to let IBM sell both CP/M and Microsoft DOS side by side, and to let the market decide which was best. But the deck was stacked.
I can only tell you that we were quite shocked to see that the price for PC-DOS was $40 and the price for CP/M86 was $240. We were given no indication at all whatsoever until it was actually rolled out that they were going to do a 6-to-1 price difference. So in fact, IBM did let the market decide. It was pretty hard to imagine that somebody could justify buying CP/M86, which had very similar functionality to PC-DOS, when there was a 6-to-1 price difference.
Some industry people have pointed to this incident as a turning point in PC history, and the moment that guaranteed the demise of CP/M and the rise of MS-DOS. Others have pointed out that it somehow changed Gary professionally and personally.
The frustration that I think more and more frustrated, and to a degree I have to be honest about, embittered him some in later years, was the fact that he continually had this comparison thrust on him. That anytime he would have an interview or meet a company in a business context, there were the frequent questions: did you really go flying when IBM came to visit? What really happened? So that would frequently be asked, and that was always a frustration, because Gary was a person that I think was very proud of his achievements, of the fact that he actually was instrumental in building this open architecture that we have in the industry.
I think Gary's view was that what happened happened. I think he, if anything, regretted that people didn't appreciate the contributions he made. I think all people who are really driven to do something and who are very bright spend some time wondering about the ones that got away. But I think of all the people I've known in business, Gary worried the least about the ones that got away.
DRI's loss of the IBM contract was Microsoft's gain, and the beginning of Microsoft's ascent to software stardom. But the reasons for IBM's decisions are still fuzzy and subject to different interpretations.
I think what really changed the perspective from IBM's standpoint had to do with the fact that when Gates got involved, he basically said, look, we'll do whatever you need. We'll put energy, we'll put people, we'll work as hard as we can to make this happen. As opposed to the way Gary Kildall and his folks looked at it, which was, oh, here's another project. Remember, Kildall had already reached a certain level of success at that point, where at this particular time, Gates and the folks at Microsoft were in their very early stages.
But I think that there's also some, I don't think blame's exactly the right word, but some responsibility goes to the customers as well. Because if IBM had not put all of their eggs in the Microsoft basket, they wouldn't have the problem that they do today, trying to sell Warp against, an OS2 against the monster that they kind of created.
Whatever the reason, the competition between DRI and Microsoft seemed to become a personal battle between Gary Kildall and Bill Gates, at least in the public eye.
Well, Gary always considered Bill Gates a very good friend. In those early days, they all they all were very friendly with each other and cooperative. And certainly Bill Gates says today that he sent IBM to DRI when they were looking for the operating system. I was on a panel that Ben Rosen put on for the Rosen Forum in those very early days. And Gary got up and talked about what his plans were for CP/M and where the company was going, and then made a comment. Well, this is a very large market, and there's room for lots of companies. And Bill Gates interrupted, and he said, no, there'll only be one company.
Gary Kildall's life cannot be summed up by any one incident. It was made up of many notable accomplishments and a constant desire to innovate. His numerous contributions to the PC industry are evident, if not always recognized. To those who knew him well, it was the delight of discovery and not the money that drove him.
And I think that in his mind, what he was always looking for is, what is it that he could get or do or create with the technology that would be his big win? And that was elusive. And in fact, the fact that it was elusive, I think, played very heavily on the way he lived the latter part of his life.
Gary Kildall's untimely death in 1994 at the age of 52 was a reminder that the light of genius is transitory and fragile. To his many friends and associates, it was a warning that we should cherish our relationships while we can.
He is among a very small group of people that helped change the world in the 70s, and I think another group of people who've taken advantage of it in the 80s and the 90s, and I'm sure that will continue. But Gary made a difference. I think he knew he made a difference, and certainly the people who knew Gary knew he made a difference.
I think at this point in time it would be a shame to have Gary forgotten as being a person that was instrumental to the growing of this whole industry itself. Gary was somebody that had an infectious enthusiasm. If you go out in the industry and talk with associates that he worked with at a business level, knew Gary as a person that enjoyed the warmth of human contact, that enjoyed going to parties, to be very personable. He was not somebody that restricted his focus to just the decision makers and the people that were leading the businesses and whatever. He was somebody that had a breadth of interests and was a very open person. So I think it would be a real loss if all that the industry remembers about Gary is he was the guy that was flying the day IBM came.
Because genius and a gentleman, a rare combination. Gary did make a lot of money, but he was driven by an honest desire to create new ideas that could expand the human potential. For the Computer Chronicles, I'm Stuart Chaffee.